6 months after Cerberus went dark, the construction yards in Earth orbit blazed with activity that would have seemed impossible to previous generations. Massive structures taking shape through cooperation between nations that had spent centuries viewing each other as enemies. The ship called Odyssey grew from blueprints that combined human ingenuity with fragments of ancient human technology. And engineers worked in shifts around the clock while politicians below argued about who would crew humanity's first interstellar vessel, Sarah. Chun had become something between a diplomat and a prophet in those months, traveling between capitals to share what Cerberus had revealed. And she found herself appointed as chief liaison for ancient human systems despite having no formal training for a Vicon for a Zening for a Zeord. Job that should not exist. The drive system is functional, the chief engineer reported during the daily briefing. A woman from India named Priya Sharma, who had spent 40 years working on theoretical physics and now got to see her wildest theories proven correct. We can reach the vault coordinates in approximately 3 weeks if nothing breaks. Sarah studied the holographic projection of the Odyssey with mixed feelings because the ship was beautiful in its way, but represented a gamble that could doom their species if things went wrong. And she knew the Council would not simply let them reach the vault unopposed. "What about weapons?" asked Commander John Williams from the American Space Force, a military man who understood that good intentions meant nothing if you could not defend yourself. "Can we fight if the Council intercepts us?" Priya shook her head with evident frustration. "The ancient human weapon systems are too complex to integrate on our timeline," she admitted. "We have basic defensive shields using their power generation methods, but in a direct fight we would lose badly." The assembled representatives from Earth's major nations exchanged worried glances because sending a ship to claim ancient human technology while unable to defend that ship seemed like the fastest way to start a war humanity could not win. "Perhaps we should reconsider this approach," the European Union representative suggested carefully. "We could attempt diplomatic contact with the Council and explain that we mean no harm." Sarah felt a flash of anger at the suggestion because diplomacy was what you did with people who had not tried to exterminate you. And she forced herself to respond calmly despite her feelings. "The Council tried to kill us," she stated flatly. "They sent 7 ships to crack our planet and only stopped because they discovered we had defenses they could not overcome. And they are currently mobilizing forces to prevent us from reaching the vault." She pulled up intelligence that human spy satellites had gathered showing Council fleet movements, converging on approach vectors to the vault's location. And the numbers were sobering, with at least 20 capital ships and countless support vessels. "If we do nothing, they will seal the vault permanently or destroy it," Sarah continued. "And we will be left dependent on the Council's mercy, which they have already shown us they do not possess." The Chinese admiral spoke up with the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in disputed waters. "Then we must move quickly before their forces fully assemble," he said decisively. "And we must accept that our crew may not return." The crew selection had been the subject of intense debate because everyone wanted their nation represented, but the ship could only carry 50 people. And the final manifest read like a catalog of Earth's best and brightest across every field. Sarah herself would be aboard, as would Commander Williams and Priya Sharma, along with scientists and soldiers and diplomats from 24 nations. And each had been briefed that they might be flying toward either humanity's salvation or its extinction. The launch came on a Tuesday morning with billions watching on screens worldwide. And the Odyssey lifted from Earth orbit with drives that bent space-time in ways that made Einstein's equations look like elementary school arithmetic within seconds. The ship had accelerated to speeds that made conventional rockets look stationary, and Earth fell away behind them as they raced toward the galactic rim at velocities that turned stars into streaks. FDL transition in 10 seconds. Priya announced from the engineering station, and Sarah gripped her seat. Restraints while trying not to think about all the ways experimental technology could fail catastrophically. The universe twisted and reality became temporarily negotiable as the Odyssey slipped into a dimension where distance meant something different. And Sarah experienced a moment of profound dislocation before the ship stabilized and they were traveling faster than light. Transition successful, Priya reported with barely suppressed excitement. We are exceeding theoretical maximum velocity by 17% and holding steady. Commander Williams checked tactical displays and frowned at what he saw. Contact bearing 317 Mark 42, he announced. Appears to be Council vessels on intercept course. Sarah pulled up the sensor data and felt her heart sink because 3 ships were already moving to block their path. And she recognized the energy signatures as military vessels, not merchant traffic. They were waiting for us, she said quietly. Which means they have been tracking our preparations and know exactly where we are going. The communication system chimed with an incoming message request, and Sarah debated ignoring it before deciding that understanding the enemy was essential. And she accepted the connection to find herself facing Fleetmaster Corvaxis, Dr. Chen, the alien said through translation software that gave his voice an oddly flat quality. I am impressed by your species' ability to rebuild ancient human technology so quickly, but you must understand that I cannot allow you to reach the vault. Sarah studied the 4-eyed creature on her screen and saw something in his expression that might have been regret. And she chose her words carefully because this might be humanity's only chance to avoid bloodshed. Fleetmaster, you tried to exterminate us based on lies your council told you about who we are. She replied evenly, we are going to the vault to reclaim what belongs to us by right of inheritance, and we will defend ourselves if necessary. Kovaxis was silent for a long moment, and Sarah could see him struggling with some internal conflict. And when he finally spoke, his words carried weight that transcended translation. I believe you when you say the council lied to me, he admitted. And I have spent 6 months reviewing classified records that prove ancient humans were deliberately written out of history, but that does not change the reality that your ancestors nearly destroyed the galaxy. So your solution is to keep us ignorant and defenseless while you debate whether to kill us. Sarah shot back, how is that justice? It is not justice, Corvaxis agreed. But it might be survival for everyone else because the weapons in that vault could rewrite physical laws, and I have seen the projections of what happens if those weapons are ever used again. Sarah felt the weight of his argument because she had seen the same data in Cerberus's files. Records of weapons that could cause stars to collapse or turn entire planetary systems inside out. And she understood why the Council feared ancient human technology. Then help us, she said suddenly as an idea formed. Come with us to the vault and see what we do with the power we reclaim, because if we choose wisdom over weapons, you will have proof that humanity has learned from its past. Kovaxis stared at her through the screen with an expression she could not read, and she pressed her advantage while she had his attention. But if you try to stop us by force, you will prove that the Council values control over justice, she continued. And humanity will remember that and act accordingly. The communication cut off abruptly, and Sarah was left staring at a blank screen while wondering if she had just doomed them all. And Commander Williams was already ordering weapons charged and shields raised. 3 ships breaking formation, the tactical officer announced. 2 moving to intercept while the 3rd is falling back. Sarah held her breath as she watched the display, because everything depended on what Corvaxis decided in the next few seconds. And she knew that firing the first shot would make reconciliation impossible. Then the communication system chimed again, and Kovaxis reappeared with what might have been the alien equivalent of a resigned smile. I am ordering my ships to stand down, he said. And I am joining you aboard the Odyssey, because if humanity is going to reclaim Ancient technology someone should witness, whether you have truly learned wisdom. The relief Sarah felt was overwhelming, but she kept her voice steady. We will reduce speed so you can match vectors, she said formally. And Fleet Master, thank you for trusting us. I am not certain I do trust you, Corvaxis replied honestly. But I trust you more than I trust the Council's judgment after they lied to me for 800 years. As the Odyssey continued toward the vault with an unexpected ally aboard, Sarah allowed herself to hope that maybe humanity could forge a different path forward. One that did not repeat the mistakes of the past, but the vault still waited ahead, full of secrets and weapons and knowledge that could save or damn them all. The vault hung in space like a monument to hubris and hope combined. A massive orbital construct wrapped around a black hole that provided unlimited power through Hawking radiation, and its surface was covered in symbols that made Sarah's eyes hurt when she looked at them too long. The space-time warping around the structure is incredible. Priya reported from her station while running scans that kept showing impossible results. It would take us years to approach using conventional drives, but the access codes Cerberus provided should create a stable corridor. Fleet Master Corvaxis stood on the Odyssey's bridge studying the vault with his 4 eyes showing something that might have been awe or terror. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone confronting their civilization's greatest nightmare. I have seen ancient human facilities before, but nothing on this scale, he admitted. The power generation alone exceeds the total output of my entire home system, and this is just the housing for whatever lies inside. Sarah activated the access protocols with genetic verification that confirmed her as a valid heir to ancient human legacy. And the vault responded by opening a tunnel through the warped space that surrounded it like a protective shell. The Odyssey moved forward carefully while the crew held their breath, because one miscalculation would send them falling into the black hole. And the tunnel walls glowed with energy that existed in states between matter and radiation. They docked at a hangar bay large enough to hold 1,000 ships. And Sarah led a team of 20 through corridors that had not seen visitors in 20,000 years, with Corvaxis accompanying them as promised witness to whatever they discovered. The first chamber they entered was a library of sorts with knowledge stored in crystalline matrices that interfaced directly with human neural patterns. And Sarah touched one of the crystals experimentally before gasping as information flooded her mind. She saw the rise of ancient humanity from a dozen different origin worlds, their expansion across the stars driven by curiosity and ambition, their encounters with the precursors who had ruled the galaxy for eons before she saw the tensions that led to war as multiple advanced civilizations competed for resources and territory and philosophical dominance. And she felt the horror of weapons being deployed that could literally rewrite reality in localized spaces. Most painfully, she saw the end as ancient humanity realized too late that they had created weapons they could not control. And she watched worlds die not from enemy action but from their own technology running amok. When Sarah withdrew from the crystal, her face was wet with tears for ancestors she had never known and mistakes that still echoed across millennia. And she understood now why the Council feared humanity's return. They tried to stop it at the end, she said quietly to the assembled team. The ancient humans realized they had gone too far and tried to seal their weapons away, but the damage was already done. Commander Williams approached one of the other crystalline storage units with military pragmatism. Does this facility contain those weapons? He asked directly. And if so, can we access them? Sarah moved deeper into the chamber following a pull. She did not fully understand until she stood before a massive sealed door marked with warnings in 100 languages. And she knew without touching the crystal archive that behind this door lay the Genesis Protocol and the Omega Arsenal. Cerberus mentioned 2 things. Specifically, she explained while the team gathered around her. The Genesis Protocol, which can terraform hundreds of worlds simultaneously and create habitable planets in decades instead of millennia. And the other thing, Corvaxis asked, though his tone suggested he already knew and feared the answer, the Omega Arsenal. Sarah continued while touching the door, which responded to her genetic markers by displaying a schematic. Weapons that can manipulate physical constants within defined spaces, effectively rewriting the laws of physics locally. The implications hung in the air like a storm about to break, because everyone present understood what such weapons meant. And Priya voiced what they were all thinking. With the Genesis Protocol, we could solve resource scarcity across the entire galaxy, she said carefully. No more wars over habitable planets, because we could create new ones and there would be enough for everyone. And with the Omega Arsenal, you could destroy anyone who tried to stop you from doing so, Corvaxis finished. Which is exactly the combination that led to the Cascade War. Sarah stood at the door facing a choice that would define humanity's future and possibly the galaxy's. And she thought about Cerberus's final words about hoping they would be wiser than their ancestors. We take the Genesis Protocol, she decided. And we leave the Omega Arsenal sealed unless the galaxy faces an existential threat that requires it. Commander Williams objected immediately with military logic. If we leave those weapons sealed, the Council could come back later and destroy them or claim them for themselves, he argued. Taking them ensures they cannot be used against us. Taking them also ensures we have the option to use them, Sarah countered. And having the option makes using them more likely because humans are very good at justifying whatever serves our immediate interests. The debate might have continued, but alarms suddenly blared throughout the vault as sensors detected multiple ships dropping out of FTL at the edge of the system. And tactical displays showed a fleet that made the initial extermination force look tiny by comparison. 57 capital ships and over 200 support vessels. Commander Williams reported grimly, "That is enough firepower to reduce this entire facility to atoms." A communication request came through, and Sarah accepted it to find herself facing not Kovacs's superior, but the Council Archon herself, flanked by representatives from a dozen species. "Dr. Chun, you have done what we feared most," the Archon stated without preamble. "You have accessed ancient human weapons, and now the Council must make a choice between trusting you or destroying the vault with you inside it." Sarah felt anger surge through her, but forced herself to remain calm because responding with emotion would only confirm the Council's fears about human irrationality. And she needed them to see reason. "We have made our own choice," she replied while behind her the team transferred the Genesis Protocol data into the Odyssey systems. "We are taking technology that can create life and leaving weapons that can only destroy." The Archon's expression showed surprise that seemed genuine. "You are not claiming the Omega Arsenal?" she asked, as if suspecting a trick. "We are not claiming it because we do not trust ourselves with it," Sarah admitted with brutal honesty. "Our ancestors nearly destroyed everything because they believed they could control such weapons, and we have learned from their mistake." Sarah gestured for the camera to follow her as she moved back to the sealed door and placed her hand on the access panel. And with her genetic authority, she activated the permanent lockdown protocol that Cerberus had warned existed for exactly this purpose. The Omega Arsenal is now sealed with genetic locks that require unanimous consent from representatives of at least 1,000 human worlds to open, she explained as the door seals glowed and hardened into something that could survive the heat death of the universe. Given that humanity currently occupies exactly one world that seems safe enough, the Council Archon conferred with her fellow representatives in whispered conversation that the translator did not pick up. And Sarah waited with forced patience while knowing that the wrong decision here would mean war. "You would share the Genesis Protocol with the galaxy?" the Archon finally asked. "Even with species that tried to exterminate you, we would share it with anyone willing to use it peacefully," Sarah confirmed. Because solving resource scarcity benefits everyone, and because proving we can cooperate is more valuable than revenge. Kovaxis stepped forward into the camera's view, and his presence seemed to surprise the council representatives. I have observed these humans closely, he stated with formal authority, and I believe they are sincere in their desire for peaceful coexistence while maintaining the capability for self-defense. The Archon studied him with an expression that mixed respect and disappointment. You were supposed to stop them, Fleet Master, she noted. Not join them. I was supposed to follow orders based on accurate intelligence, Kovaxis countered. And once I learned the truth, I chose to exercise my own judgment as any intelligent being should. Sarah could see the political calculations running behind them, Archon's translucent features as she weighed options and risks. And she decided to offer one final incentive that might tip the balance. We propose a new accord, Sarah said formally. Humanity receives recognition as inheritors of ancient human legacy with full sovereignty and a seat on the Galactic Council, and in exchange, we share the Genesis Protocol freely and submit to Galactic oversight on weapons development. You would accept restrictions on your military capabilities. The Archon asked with obvious skepticism. We would accept reasonable safeguards that apply equally to all species. Sarah clarified, because we understand that trust must be earned, and we are willing to prove ourselves over time. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever, while Sarah's team held their breath, and the assembled fleet outside waited for orders that could begin or prevent a war. And finally the Archon spoke with words that changed everything. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council convened within 20 minutes of Sarah Chun's first call, with representatives joining via secure video links from every time zone, while military and scientific advisors crowded into WAS. Rooms that had never seen such urgency. Sarah stood before the assembled representatives with her laptop showing data streams from Cerberus. And she delivered the news that humanity had perhaps hours to live with a steadiness that surprised even herself. There are 7 warships in our solar system, right now with enough firepower to crack our planet's crust. She began without preamble, because there was no time for gentle introductions. They belong to something called the Galactic Council, and they are here to exterminate us before we become a threat. The chamber erupted in questions and denials and demands for proof. But Sarah simply played the recordings from Cerberus and showed the telescope data of the alien fleet. And the room fell silent as humanity confronted for the first time the reality that they were not alone and that their neighbors wanted them dead. We also have defenses, Sarah continued once the shock had settled into grim attention. Automated satellites that have been dormant in our orbit for 20,000 years and that are now activating in response to the threat. The Russian ambassador leaned forward with intensity that suggested military training and asked the question everyone was thinking, who built these defenses and why did we not know about them? Sarah took a deep breath because the next part would sound like insanity, but the data was undeniable. We built them, or rather our ancestors did back when humanity was a spacefaring civilization that spanned thousands of worlds before some kind of catastrophic war wiped nearly everything out. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. And Sarah watched as the leaders of Earth's nations struggled to process information that rewrote human history and identity in a single sentence. I know this sounds impossible, she pressed on, but Cerberus has provided genetic data showing that humans on Earth carry markers consistent with populations that have been isolated for approximately 20,000 years, and the math checks out and the technology exists, and we need to focus on survival right now. The Chinese primer spoke up with characteristic pragmatism. What do these defenses need from us, and what are our chances of surviving the next few hours? Sarah connected her laptop to the main display and brought up the interface Cerberus had provided. showing a network of 73 satellites arranged in orbital shells around Earth, each one pulsing with power levels that made nuclear reactors look like campfires. Cerberus says the defenses can repel an initial assault, but sustained bombardment will eventually overwhelm them, she explained while highlighting threat vectors and defensive coverage zones. Our best chance is to buy time for Cerberus to activate additional systems that might convince the aliens to negotiate. What kind of systems? The American president asked with the tone of someone who already suspected they would not like the answer. Cerberus has not been entirely forthcoming about that, Sarah admitted. But it mentioned something about networked facilities across the galaxy that have been dormant since the ancient war, and that are now receiving activation signals high above Earth in the cold vacuum of space. Cerberus was indeed sending signals at faster than light speeds using quantum entanglement methods that current human physics could barely theorize. And across the galaxy on dead worlds and in hidden nebulae, ancient machines stirred to life on a barren moon orbiting a red dwarf in Sector 447. A massive facility began drawing power from the star itself through methods that seemed to violate thermodynamics, and weapon systems that could strike targets light years away swiveled toward alignment coordinates in the depths of the Horsehead Nebula. A construction yard that had been silent for millennia suddenly blazed with activity as automated systems began checking integrity of ships that had waited in preservation fields for crews that never came, and on 17 different worlds scattered across council space, archaeological dig sites that had been studying ancient human ruins reported the same phenomenon. Sealed doors were opening, containment fields were dropping, and technology that had been inert for 20,000 years was coming online. Fleetmaster Corvaxis saw the reports flooding in from across the galaxy and felt his decision becoming more complicated by the second. Because destroying Earth was one thing, but facing a resurgent ancient human network was something entirely different. "Sir, the weapons are charged and ready," his weapons officer reported with admirable calm considering the circumstances. "We can begin bombardment on your command." Corvaxis stared at his tactical display showing Earth as a small blue dot surrounded by the defensive satellites that Cerberus controlled. And he ran combat simulations that showed his fleet could punch through, but would take significant casualties. "Fire," he commanded, because the council had ordered it, and because he had never disobeyed an order in 800 years, and because sometimes mercy was not an option when survival was at stake. 7 capital ships unleashed their primary weapons simultaneously. Particle beams and plasma torpedoes and kinetic projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed. Enough destructive power to annihilate any conventional planetary defense. The response was instant and impossible, according to every known law of physics, because the defensive satellites did not simply block the attacks, but seemed to redirect them through dimensions that should not. Exis Corvaxis watched in stunned silence as 3 of his capital ships reported catastrophic systems failures. Their weapons arrays transformed into exotic matter that physics said could not exist in stable form. And he realized with horror that he was fighting technology that his civilization could not comprehend. "Cease fire," he ordered desperately. "All ships retreat to previous positions immediately." But even as his fleet fell back, Corvaxis knew the damage was done because his attack had proven hostile intent, and Cerberus would be entirely justified in escalating to lethal force on Earth. Sarah Chun watched the space battle on displays that Cerberus had activated throughout the SETI facility, and she felt simultaneously terrified and awed by the technology humanity's ancestors had created. "Cerberus," she typed rapidly. "Can you destroy their fleet?" The response came with what Sarah could swear was reluctance. "Yes, but doing so would drain my remaining power reserves and leave Earth defenseless if additional threats arrive." Sarah's hands hovered over her keyboard as she wrestled with impossible decisions. And she thought about billions of people going about their lives below, completely unaware of how close they had come to extinction. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "Fleetmaster Corvaxis has ordered a retreat, but he has also launched a kinetic projectile on a ballistic trajectory toward Earth," Cerberus replied. "The projectile is traveling at 0.9 light speed and will impact in approximately 47 minutes. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice because there was no stopping something moving that fast with any human technology. And she knew Cerberus was about to tell her something she did not want to hear. "I can intercept the projectile, but doing so will exhaust my power reserves completely," Cerberus stated with mechanical precision. "After that, Earth will be undefended, and I will go offline permanently. Do it," Sarah commanded without hesitation, because saving Earth now was more important than worrying about hypothetical future threats. "And before you go offline, tell me where we can find more ancient human technology." Cerberus processed her request for several seconds that felt like eternities. And when it responded, Sarah understood that she had just been given the keys to either humanity's salvation or its damnation. "Coordinates being transmitted to your system," Cerberus said. "Location of the vault which contains the full repository of ancient human knowledge and technology, including weapons that could threaten the galaxy." The data flooded Sarah's computer with stellar coordinates pointing to a system beyond the galactic rim, and included her activation codes and access protocols that supposedly would grant entry to whoever carried valid human genetic markers. "The Council will attempt to prevent you from reaching the vault," Cerberus warned. "But if you succeed, you will find everything humanity needs to defend itself and perhaps understand why we fell." High above Earth, Cerberus diverted every remaining erg of power into a single directed energy pulse that reached out across millions of kilometers and struck the incoming kinetic projectile, and the exotic physics that ancient humans had mastered transformed unstoppable momentum into harmless radiation. As Cerberus went dark, its final transmission echoed across every system it had activated. "The heirs have awakened in Terra Invicta." Again, Sarah Chun looked at the coordinates on her screen and knew that humanity had just been handed a terrible gift. And she wondered whether they had the wisdom to use it properly or would simply repeat the mistakes that had nearly destroyed everything 20,000 years before. But that was a question for later, because now she had to convince Earth's governments to unite and build a faster-than-light ship and reach the vault before the Council could stop them. The race had begun. The Council Archon's holographic form materialized in Kovacs's ready room with unusual speed that suggested she had been expecting his emergency communication, and her translucent features showed something he had never seen before in 800 years of service, which was genuine fear. "You encountered the signal," she stated rather than asked. And Kovacs noticed that she had come alone without the usual observers and recorders that accompanied official communications. "I need you to halt all operations immediately and await further instructions." Kovacs felt his secondary hearts accelerate with anger because he had taken fleets into battle against species that fought with desperation and cunning, had made decisions that cost thousands of lives, and never once had command treated him like an ignorant foot soldier who could not be trusted with basic intelligence. "You will explain to me right now what ancient humans are doing broadcasting from Earth when you told me this was a primitive species that barely understood orbital mechanics," he said with barely controlled fury. "And you will explain why the Council sent me to exterminate a species without telling me they might be connected to precursor-era civilizations." The Archon's form flickered, as if she was struggling with some internal decision that weighed heavily on her. And when she finally spoke, her voice carried undertones of grief that seemed to encompass millennia. "The truth was classified above even Supreme Council clearance for 20,000 years," she began, and Kovacs felt his world tilting further into impossibility. Humans did not evolve on Earth, or at least they did not evolve only on Earth, because they were already spread across 1,000 worlds during the Precursor Age. Corvaxis sat down heavily in his command chair as the implications crashed through his mind like waves against a failing seawall. And he gestured for her to continue because clearly everything he thought he knew about galactic history was about to be rewritten. The Cascade War nearly destroyed everything. The Archon continued, and her form seemed to age as she spoke about events she could not possibly remember, but which clearly haunted her species' collective memory. The details are lost, but we know that multiple precursor civilizations fought using weapons that could rewrite physical laws, and ancient humanity was not just present during that war, but was one of the primary combatants. The holographic star. Charts behind the Archon shifted to show the galaxy as it had existed 20,000 years before. And Corvaxis saw human territorial markers spread across nearly a quarter of all known space in a vast empire that dwarfed even the current Council's reach. When the war ended, most of the precursor species were extinct, and humanity was thought to have been completely destroyed. She explained, while the map showed world after world going dark. The survivors who founded the Council found human ruins on thousands of planets, filled with technology so advanced and dangerous that it was sealed away and forbidden. Corvaxis watched the historical display with growing horror because he was beginning to understand the true scope of what the Council had hidden, and he forced himself to ask the question whose answer he already feared. But some humans survived, he said quietly, and it was not a question because the signal from Earth made that obvious. They survived on Earth and regressed and forgot everything they had been. The Archon's confirmation came with visible relief that he had grasped the situation quickly, and she expanded the display to show Earth's history from 20,000 years ago forward, showing a small population of humans struggling through ice ages and disasters while their genetic memories slowly faded into myth. We did not know they were there until approximately 8,000 years ago when our scout ships detected primitive agriculture in the Fertile Crescent, she admitted. By then, the decision had been made to classify all information about ancient humanity at the highest levels because the Council founders feared what might happen if humans ever learned what they had been. So you watch them, Corvaxis said with growing understanding and disgust. You watch them rebuild from nothing while sitting on sealed vaults full of their own technology, and you said nothing. The Archon did not deny it, and her silence was confirmation enough. And Corvaxis felt a wave of anger and betrayal that threatened to overwhelm his military discipline because everything he had believed about the Council's moral authority had just revealed itself to be built on lies. Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Sarah Chun sat in the SETI laboratory staring at signal patterns that made no sense according to any known physics. And her hands trembled slightly as she ran the analysis for the 7th time, hoping the results would change, but knowing they would not. The signal had appeared 18 hours ago, from somewhere beyond Neptune's orbit, and it had taken her this long to isolate it from background radiation and decode its structure. And what she found challenged everything she thought she understood about humanity's place in the universe. This is not alien, she said aloud to the empty lab, because speaking the words made them slightly more real and manageable. This is human. Or at least it is using human mathematical frameworks, but it is more advanced than anything we have ever created. Her computer screen showed the signal's recursive structure spiraling into dimensions that Earth's mathematics could barely describe. And embedded within the carrier wave was what appeared to be activation codes for systems she had no knowledge of. Sarah pulled up tracking data from orbital telescopes and felt her breath catch when she saw the anomalous readings from Earth's orbit. Dozens of objects that have been classified as space debris, suddenly showing power signatures that should not exist. "Oh God," she whispered as realization dawned. "We have satellites up there that we did not put there." The SETI system chimed with An incoming priority alert, and Sarah nearly fell from her chair when she saw that someone or something was attempting to establish communication with her station directly, and the authorization codes that accompanied the request matched. Nothing in any Earth database. She accepted the connection with shaking hands, and her screen filled with text in perfect English that introduced itself with impossible calm. I am Cerberus Autonomous Defense Network, and I've been maintaining vigil over humanity's last refuge for 20,000 years. Sarah's mind went blank with shock for several heartbeats before training and curiosity reasserted themselves, and she began typing responses with the desperate intensity of someone who knows they are touching something vast and dangerous. "What are you?" she typed, and then immediately followed with, "Why have you been hiding?" And then, "What is happening?" Response came instantly, as if Cerberus had been waiting for these questions across millennia. "I am what your ancestors created to protect their children, should anything survive the cascade. And then, I hid because you were not ready. And finally, you are being hunted by those who fear your return." Sarah felt ice run through her veins as the implications became clear, and she forced herself to ask the question that might doom billions. "Is there a fleet coming to destroy us?" "Yes," Cerberus replied with terrible simplicity. 7 capital ships of the Galactic Council currently holding position beyond Uranus, and debating whether to complete their extermination mission now that they know what you are. Sarah stood from her console and began making calls to every government contact she had, because if there was ever a time for humanity to unite, it was now. And she knew with absolute certainty that the next few hours would determine whether their species survived to see tomorrow back on his ship. Corvaxis received new orders from the full council that had convened in emergency session, and the orders were simple and terrifying. Destroy Earth immediately before ancient human networks fully activate or withdraw, and accept termination of your command. He looked at the orders for a long moment while his crew waited with tense attention, and he thought about 800 years of service and 3 species he had personally eliminated, and whether any of it had been justified or simply murder dressed in the language of necessity. "Weapons officer," he finally said, and his voice carried the weight of a decision that would echo through history. "Prepare all primary cannons for planetary bombardment and navigation plot firing solution for Earth." His second-in-command looked at him with something like horror, but said nothing because orders were orders. And across the fleet's 7 capital ships began charging their main weapons to full power. Gavaxis stared at Earth on his display and wondered if he was about to become the greatest hero or the greatest monster in galactic history. And he knew he would find out within the hour. The chamber existed in absolute silence as the Galactic Council cast their votes. One by one, each species representative pressing their clawed hand or tentacle or crystalline appendage against the judgment sphere before them. And the sphere glowed red with each touch until all 700 representatives had condemned an entire world to death. Fleetmaster Corvaxis stood at attention in the observation gallery, his 4 eyes watching the proceedings with the cold efficiency that had made him the Council's chosen executioner 3 times before. And he felt nothing as the final vote came through unanimous as always, because mercy was a luxury the galaxy could not afford when dealing with potential catastrophic species. The holographic display showed Earth spinning blue and green and beautiful in the void, completely unaware that light years away its fate had been sealed by beings who considered themselves guardians of galactic peace. And the planet seemed so small and fragile that Corvaxis almost felt something like regret before his training reasserted itself, and he remembered the projections. Simulations were clear and terrifying in their implications, because humanity had gone from basic agriculture to splitting atoms in mere thousands of years, a pace of advancement so rapid that it defied every known model of technological development. And at their current trajectory, they would achieve faster than light travel within 2 centuries, maximum 2 centuries, sounded like a long time to short-lived species, but Kovacs had lived for 800 years, and he knew that 2 centuries was nothing more than a heartbeat in galactic terms. Barely enough time to prepare adequate defenses if humanity proved hostile. And the Council's policy was simple. Better to prevent the threat than face it later. The Council Archon approached him after the session ended, her translucent form shimmering with what Kovacs had learned to recognize as concern over his decades of service. And she transmitted directly into his neural implant the coordinates and authorization codes he would need. 7 capital ships as usual. She communicated without speaking aloud because some decisions were too grave to voice in chambers where recording devices might preserve them for history to judge. Standard sterilization protocol, but make it quick and clean because this species has done nothing wrong except be born with too much potential. Ovrix acknowledged the order with a gesture that meant understanding across 100 species languages. And he left the council chambers to begin preparations for what the official records would call preventative intervention in System Sol 3. But what everyone involved understood was simple murder on a planetary scale. His fleet assembled at the designated coordinates beyond Neptune's orbit over the course of 3 standard weeks. 7 massive dreadnoughts, each capable of reducing a continent to molten slag with sustained bombardment. And the crews went about their preparations with grim professionalism because most had done this before. The humans below remained ignorant of the doom gathering at their doorstep. Their primitive radio telescopes pointed in the wrong directions. Their attention focused on their own internal conflicts and their stumbling attempts to establish permanent settlements on their barren moon. Kovacs reviewed the intelligence reports one final time before giving the order to advance. Studying images of human cities sprawling across their continents, billions of individuals going about lives they assumed would continue indefinitely. And he noted clinically that their architecture showed remarkable creativity for such a young species. The psychological profile troubled him more than he cared to admit to his crew because humans showed a disturbing combination of tribalism and cooperation, capable of savage warfare against each other, yet also capable of moments of stunning compassion and self-sacrifice. And their art suggested depths of emotion that rivaled species. 10 times older, but troubling psychology did not change the mathematics of threat assessment. And the mathematics said that humanity would either destroy themselves in nuclear fire within 50 years or survive long enough to develop technologies that would make them effectively unstoppable. And the Council could not afford to gamble on which outcome would prevail. All ships report ready, his second-in-command announced from her station, her voice carrying the flat affect that military personnel used when discussing operations they would rather not think about too deeply. Course plotted for Earth orbit and weapon systems, charged to full capacity. Kovacs gave the order, and the fleet began its final approach. Engines burning hard on a trajectory that would bring them into bombardment range within 48 hours. And he settled into his command chair to begin the waiting that always preceded execution. 18 hours into the approach. As they crossed the orbit of Uranus, the sensor officer suddenly stiffened at her console and began running rapid diagnostic checks with increasingly frantic movements that immediately put Kovacs on alert. Report, he commanded sharply, because in all his years of service he had never seen that particular expression of confused horror on a sensor operator's face. Sir, we are detecting a signal, she said carefully, as if afraid the words themselves might prove dangerous. Broadcasting on frequencies that should not exist using mathematical structures that predate the Council's formation by at least 15,000 years. The bridge went absolutely silent because every member of the crew understood the implication immediately. And Kovacs felt ice forming in his primary hearts as he ordered the signal played through the ship's audio systems. The message came through in clear Standard Galactic, then in 17 other Council languages, then in dozens of ancient tongues, that had not been spoken since before the modern era began. And each iteration carried the same simple statement that struck terror into everyone who heard it. Terra Invicta, the signal declared with absolute confidence. We are still here, and we remember what was forgotten, and we have been waiting. Corvaxis stood frozen at his command station as his mind raced through impossible possibilities because that signal format matched nothing in the modern galactic database, but it matched perfectly with fragments recovered from precursor sites that belonged to civilizations that had risen and fallen before the Council existed. Full stop. He ordered, and 7 capital ships killed their forward momentum with emergency braking that stressed their engines to the limit. Battle stations and raised shields, because we are not advancing another meter until I understand what we just heard. His communication officer looked up from her console with an expression of deepest dread and said the words that Corvaxis had been desperately hoping he would not hear. Sir, the signal signature matches archived records from ancient human sites. And then she added the part that made everything infinitely worse. The ones we were told contained nothing but extinct species. Archaeological data. Corvaxis felt the deck shift beneath his feet as if the universe itself had become unstable. And he realized that everything the Council had told him about this mission might have been based on lies or at best catastrophic ignorance. Get me a direct link to the Council Archon immediately, he commanded while his mind struggled to process the implications, because ancient humans were supposed to be extinct, wiped out in the Cascade event that had nearly destroyed the galaxy 20,000 years before. But extinct species did not send signals, and they certainly did not send signals that said, "We remember," in languages that should have died when their last speaker turned to dust. Millennia ago, the holographic display still showed Earth spinning peacefully in the distance. But now Corvaxis looked at it with new eyes and wondered what other secrets the Council had kept from him, and whether the real threat to galactic peace was not the humans on that world, but the truth about who they really were.